Hi, shalom, friends. One of the most remarkable things about history is that until it happens, you're not aware of it. After it happens, unless you actually read about it, you forget it. Because the moment turns into another moment, which turns into another moment. For example, those of us that lived through the collapse of the Western Wall, of the Berlin Wall, we read about it and we see that we mark it as something extraordinary, and yet just a couple of months after that happened, we were caught up with the current events of that time. It's only when we reflect upon it that we realize how amazing this event was. In the year 2010, in South America, there was a near disaster, and it was transformed into something remarkable, the human spirit. I'm referring to a desert called the Atacama Desert, and there was a mining company, and they were mining for gold and copper, and the shaft broke. 33 miners were trapped. Now, actually, those of us that would be watching CNN will probably see a little bit of a rolling statement, a crisis in Chile, and then might have made the news, and then 2-3 days later, we might have read the sad story of, they're still trying to get him out. A week later, well, it's requiem, it's all over. Indeed, that's how it started. Another disaster story to be filed away with all other disasters. But after a little more than 2 weeks, suddenly the world was focused on this remote place on Earth. What had happened was 33 miners were trapped, and there were only rations enough for 2 or 3 days. That's a fact. That's all there was, rations for 2 or 3 days at most. And after a day or two, the people realized that it would take weeks, if not months, to drill to get to the miners. And essentially, though they were willing to go through the motions, because that's what the law requires, there was a deep pessimism. They would never find these 33 miners alive. And from 3 days to 6 days to 2 weeks, it became more and more apparent that this is futile. Imagine drilling through rock close to a half a mile thick in a desert, which basically means that in order to keep the drills going, it had to be fed with water that had to be trucked in. The odds against finding these people were, I don't know if it was 100 to 1, 1,000 to 1, 1,000,000 to 1, but certainly it was remote. And after 17 days of drilling, they made contact. And there's a very simple document that's taped back on the drill. The 33 are all well. We are waiting to be rescued. And of course, that catapulted everything into a different category. Suddenly they began to drill 6-inch holes, and they were able to put in medicine. They were able to put in cameras. They were able to communicate with, with the miners, and the miners were able to communicate with the outside world. Those of you that want to look this up will maybe perhaps remember it took 69 days, and they were brought out miraculously one by one. Now, why am I talking to you about this? Because it occurred to me that we could use this, at least from my perspective, as a type of a metaphor for Jewish people in exile. We are waiting for the Messiah, we're waiting for the Mashiach, and here's a fact. The fact is that we've been in exile for almost 2,000 years. Here's a fact, that the Torah that we have was given 3,300 years ago. Here's another fact, that we have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob some 4,000 years ago. And here's another fact. There has never been a people like Israel that have remained not only alive and exist, but thrive, speak an ancient language called Hebrew, follow an ancient ritual called the Torah, and talk about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as if we have pictures of them, and we're talking about our grandparents parents. We discussed the lives of Abraham and Sarah. We discussed the lives of Moshe and Aaron. We discussed the life of Miriam, the prophetess, as if they were our own, as if we know them intimately. We question, why did grandma do this? Why did grandpa do that? Why did they say this to their children? And you know what? It is personal. It is real. And I tell you that our tradition tells us that the Messiah will come and take us all out of exile and bring us back to the land of Israel, where a holy temple will be rebuilt. And you say, that's impossible. The odds are against it. The facts don't support it. It can't be. And I remind you of a fact. How many calories do you think you need for a person to consume a healthy adult male? Let's randomly say 1,800 calories, 2,000 calories. These people lived on approximately a little bit more than 300 calories. Yeah, they were starving, but they defied the odds. It's amazing. As a matter of fact, when they made contact, they couldn't send them food right away. It would have shocked them. Too much carbohydrates. They had to have glucose, and they had to have potassium. They had to do all kinds of things to enable their emaciated system to get back to normal. And the actual rescue was through a shaft, 28 inches wide. That's it. Enough for one person who's strapped into a capsule. As a matter of fact, the first one that was taken out was not the weakest, but the strongest. Because they thought that in case it doesn't work, maybe he has a fighting chance to go from in the middle of this broken pulley system, maybe he'll be able to climb. They had no idea that it would work, but it did. Later on, when they were interviewing, how did these people keep their sanity? The first thing that kept the sanity was by working as a group. Every person counted. As a matter of fact, every decision that they made was with democracy. Every person had to vote, and if the vote went one more for the pro or the con, that's who they followed. Number two, they were busy. They constantly were working to find ways of how to live and how to go. And contrary to the people on the surface, there was a room called the refuge room, only a little bit more than 500 square feet, which would have made them stir crazy, 33 people in such a confined area, but they actually found that they did some exploring underneath while they were in their trapped state, and they actually had over a half a mile to expand. So they worked as a group. They were busy. They did not fall into the mindset of being victims. They were trying to do something. They prayed. They had daily services underneath the ground, praying. Interesting enough, whether we could count science, I don't know. The families that gathered in the desert refused to give up. And they had prayer services every single day for their loved ones below. I would like to imagine this as the Jewish people being stuck in this mine. And the usual amount of calories of Torah and mitzvahs, of feeling God's closeness, has been severely curtailed. We're starving. How can we compare ourselves to the people of the old? But we're still existing. What's most important is that we stay together as a group, the Jewish people. The most important thing is not to fall into despair. We will be saved. We will be rescued. There is a God who's looking to send us a Redeemer. It will happen. And I would imagine that the family that prays might include the tzaddikim, the righteous ones, and our loved ones in heaven who are praying to the Almighty. Please help our children, help our students, help our grandchildren, help your nation that is in exile. What's remarkable as well is that these 33 people trapped a half a mile underneath tons of rock, they chose a leader. They knew they needed a leader. And there was actually more than one, but there was one in particular that was in charge. We need a leader. We have a leader. We have our rabbis, we have our teachers, we have our Rabbi. I leave this to you to think about. If now that you know this story, and God forbid, if you were to hear of a mining collapse, and there are miners stuck, and the initial thought is, by the time we get to them, they'll be dead, what would you think? You should protest. You should say the unthinkable happened. The unbelievable took place. 69 days after hope should have been given up, 69 days later, 33 ordinary people were saved because they acted extraordinary and because there was a world that was focused on getting them out. We are an extraordinary people. We have extraordinary divine assistance through the righteous, through the pure, through the simple. I am expecting that miracle very, very soon. Shalom.